This video segment is about Standard 3. It's about faculty qualifications and faculty performance and how you assess that performance. Because faculty are such a critical part of program success, NASPA determined that they warrant their own standard. As with all the video segments, you can pause at any time to look more closely at an individual slide. You're encouraged to download the slides because they have detailed notes, more detailed than the presentation. And the videos are not a substitute for attending the Accreditation Institute or reviewing the self-study instructions and other documents provided by COPRA. So matching faculty performance and qualifications with mission is essentially about managing your human resources. Obviously, there are other human resources within your program, but faculty are a very important part, and therefore, as I mentioned before, they warrant their own standard. There are two components to this standard. One is, how do you determine if someone is qualified, and how do you recruit and support a qualified faculty? And the other is, how do you assess their performance based on your mission? In the context of a logic model, which was discussed in a separate video of how you connect all the pieces within a program evaluation context, faculty are an input within your program. They're a resource for your program. The activities and strategies that they engage in through their teaching and their research and service produce outputs, maybe in the number of classes they teach, the number of students they advise, the number of grant dollars that they generate in funding, the number of publications they have. All of those things are outputs. And the faculty outputs then in turn contribute to faculty outcomes, enhanced reputation for the program, perhaps additional resources for the program, and improved ranking, any number of different things. Ideally, an improved quality of public service and improved capacity of public organizations and better public policies. Within that logic model context, though, we need to assess faculty performance. To what extent are they engaging in appropriate activities and strategies? To what extent are they generating the outputs and outcomes that help your program achieve its mission? So the starting point is looking at faculty qualifications. What qualifies someone to teach in your program? What qualifies someone to help prepare others for a career in public service? How do you ensure, if you have multiple modalities of program delivery, perhaps a face-to-face and an online version, and different faculty teaching in both of those areas, how do you ensure that you have comparably qualified faculty in both of those areas? Because they're both contributing to your accredited degree program. There are a couple of hard and fast rules within the standards about faculty, two of which are referred to as the rule of 50%. You know that there's also the rule of 5, which was discussed in the context of Standard 2, that you have to have a minimum faculty nucleus of 5. But there's also these 50% rules. That is, 50% of the courses in your program need to be taught by full-time faculty within your institution. And 50% of the courses that deliver the required competencies, what we often refer to as core courses or required courses, are taught by your nucleus faculty. Now, as with all standards, programs can justify a variation from those standards if it's grounded in mission. Some examples of those kinds of exceptions are discussed within the self-study instructions. But for the most part, we're talking about your nucleus faculty, your qualified faculty, and they can be qualified in one of two ways: academic qualifications or professional qualifications. So let's talk about each of those in turn, starting with academically qualified faculty. So to be considered academically qualified to teach in your program, it's considered automatic within 5 years of an individual receiving their terminal degree, such as a PhD or a JD, assuming that that degree is in the area in which you're hiring them and you expect them to teach and conduct research. But after that, Program policies, these are the decisions that you make, define what constitutes an academically qualified faculty member, consistent with policies of your institution, and also, very importantly, consistent with your mission. So do you expect your faculty to attend and present at conferences? Can those be state or regional conferences, or do you expect them to be national or international conferences? What kinds of publications do you expect faculty members to have? And what kinds of publication outlets? Does it need to be peer-reviewed, or are applied publication outlets and professional trade journals also acceptable? Do you require a book? What is it that is required based on your mission for a faculty member to be considered qualified? What kinds of community service do you expect? What kinds of engagement with students? All of these decisions are up to the program, but you are required to have a policy that indicates what constitutes an academically qualified faculty member. And you need to assess faculty performance to ensure that they're meeting those qualifications. There are various red flags that might exist within a program, such as your policy says that faculty need to have at least 3 publications within a 2-year period, or perhaps every year, whatever your policy states, but some don't. Or you indicate that you expect your faculty to engage in community service in order to be academically qualified, and 1 or more don't. Those are red flags for COPRA within the context of qualifications of your faculty. Now, you're also responsible for doing the same sort of thing, setting policies as it applies to professionally qualified faculty. So what does that mean? Well, we're teaching in professional master's degree programs. And as a result, we generally accept that students will benefit from interaction with and instruction from individuals who have experience. They're practitioners in the field. They are professionally qualified to be teaching. But not all practitioners are qualified to be in your classrooms. They should have terminal degrees in the areas in which they offer courses, and you need to develop your mission-guided program policies to define professional qualifications. How much experience do they need to have? What kind of experience, or at what level within an organization? How will you ensure that they have appropriate teaching abilities? And as with the academically qualified faculty, how will you assess their performance? There are also obviously red flags that could occur with respect to professionally qualified faculty. You might say that an individual needs to be currently working in the field or have worked within that field where they're teaching within the past 3 years. And then you hire someone, they're great, they're doing a wonderful job, and they retire. And they're still on your faculty 10 years after they retire. That's no longer in keeping with your policy about what constitutes a professionally qualified faculty member. But these decisions on qualifications are yours at a program level, and they're very important. Obviously, you don't want anyone teaching in your program who's not qualified, but you get to decide what constitutes qualifications, both academic and professional. Now, another important aspect of the Standard 3 regarding faculty relates to diversity. Diversity and inclusiveness, because no community is homogeneous. And we're preparing students to go out into a world that is increasingly diverse and requires them to have competencies and experience working with diversity. And regardless of where your program is located, anywhere in the world, you're responsible for ensuring that your faculty and students and graduates serve the public, and that's a diverse public. And there are various dimensions of that diversity. So how does this show up in the standard? It shows up in Standard 3.2 regarding faculty diversity in the requirement that every program have a diversity plan. Now previously, COPRA standards only required that a program have a diversity plan if they did not have a diverse faculty. Now all programs are required to have a diversity plan. And that plan must address dimensions of diversity that matter to your program. There are certain minimum expectations. For example, for a program in the United States, it's expected that you'll address the basic demographic diversity characteristics of race and gender and ethnicity. And in an international context, that the program define what are the demographic diversity characteristics most important there. But you can go beyond that. And you can address diversity dimensions that are related to your mission that may have to do with diversity of disciplinary background or ideology or any number of different things. But you do need to start with the fundamental demographic diversity characteristics. And this is not just how do you recruit and retain faculty in these areas, because sometimes those are really challenging things to do, but also how do you create and promote a climate that is supportive and inclusive of diversity. In many instances, that's where you can be more creative, that's where you can be more effective. There are various red flags that COPRA might see in this area. For example, you may have a policy that says you engage in all sorts of activities to promote diversity, and in fact, the students during a site visit might reinforce that. Except perhaps you have one student representing a minority group who happens to point out that she feels like every time issues of diversity are discussed in class, the other students and the faculty members always look to her to provide the African American perspective or the Hispanic perspective or whatever group she might be labeled as representing. That would be a red flag that perhaps the rest of your program is not providing that supportive and inclusive climate. So faculty diversity is important. And now we get to assessing performance. Standard 3.3 addresses how you assess faculty performance, particularly in 3 areas of scholarship, service, and engaging students. So given your mission, what are your expectations for faculty scholarship, community service, and engaging with students, and how do you assess whether your faculty are achieving those expectations? The reporting requirement here in the self-study report is actually relatively simple. You're simply asked to provide an exemplar, an example, the best example, for each faculty member in your nucleus, or at least 5 faculty members in your nucleus if you have many, in one of those areas, scholarship, community service, or student engagement. But in the context of overall assessment of performance, presumably you want faculty to be contributing and having positive performance in all of those areas. So during the site visit, site visitors will want to see the full CVs of your faculty and see how they are supporting your program's mission. And how those exemplars, how those examples you identified are having impacts, having outcomes that support your program's mission. So standard 3 is about faculty qualifications, faculty diversity, faculty performance. This is not just about accreditation. Ultimately, it's about improving the quality of public service.